Time for some New York stories. We start with the NYPD changing Wikipedia entries connected to NYPD brutality cases. The department confirming a story in Capitol that someone used the NYPD server to change Wikipedia pages on the Sean Bell, Eric Garner, and Amadou Diallo cases, and all in ways that show the department in a more positive light. A spokesperson saying the changes were made on their server but not done from one police plaza. They also noted that even if they could identify the person who made the changes, the only formal offense would be for using computers for non-work related purposes and not for the editing of the Wikipedia pages themselves. Jeannie, any problem if somebody in one police plaza is sanitizing the Wikipedia page? I mean, Wikipedia is a user-generated encyclopedia, so everybody can make changes to it. You have any problems with the NYPD or somebody at the building making changes?
Well, it's not the NYPD, it's somebody using the server. So it could be an administrator, it could be a police officer, I mean, it could be anybody. I would have a problem if it was the administration who was sanitizing it, but if it's somebody using the server, that's what happens on Wikipedia, and there's not much that you can do about it.
Should there be a penalty beyond just using the computer for something other than what you're supposed to be using it?
Well, I think that you're getting paid, first of all, to do the job you're there to do. You're not paid to use the computer for personal use. And so some of these officers, I'd want to know, number one, is the officer receiving overtime to do this? But well, maybe that's number two. Number one is, did someone higher up tell that person, go change this? Because we're dealing with a time where the police department's being scrutinized. And if you have the administration actually suggesting to an officer that they go in and sanitize this, it's a bigger issue.
What if it was someone connected to the case? What if it was an officer?
I mean, it seems to me we're dealing with a lot of what ifs and hypotheticals. And what we know is someone who didn't like what was on a Wikipedia page changed it, which seems pretty consistent with human behavior by the millions every day.
Well, the only thing, again, is if you're doing that on your own time, absolutely. But if you're doing that while you're at work...
But again, it's a supposition, right?
Well, no, they're at work.
We know
no
it's the
supposition
server.
there.
We know about the work server, but
Right.
to Jeannie's point, we don't know whether it was done on work time or done remotely, or whether it was done on an administrator on their lunch break.
I mean, you can change them, you can do it on your iPhone from anywhere.
But not from the police server. The police server presumably is a computer that's tied to that server.
Yeah, but if you have an email, you have a hook into the server, right?
I don't know. I don't know if you can do it.
Okay, I don't know.
I got to learn more about computers because we have too many computer stories that have been popping up in the news lately. All right, let's go to Albany, where budget battles are heating up. Lawmakers have until the end of the month to pass a spending plan on time, but question is tonight, what's more important, the result or the process? The Times was peeling back the relationship between Governor Cuomo and lawmakers, calling it more confrontational and quid pro quo. I'll do this if you do that than in years past. For example, Cuomo's offering to revise that controversial 90-day email dump policy if the legislature also allows portions of the Freedom of Information law to be applied to them. Right now, lawmakers are subject to them in a far more limited way. Another process story, Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams was leading a call this weekend for Andrea Stewart Cousins, the Senate Democratic leader, to be one of the so-called three men in a room or in those talks. He says since women's issues like abortion, health care, and education are on the agenda, women should be represented in the room. My guess is that Eric Adams is a little more posturing than actual policy movement on that one, but Scott, should I care so much about the process by which this sausage gets made, or should I just worry about what the result of it happens?
When you can't separate the process from the end result, the process, in fact, defines the end result. But you have to know the difference between real power and the theater around it. So you can have whatever public negotiations you want, but in this particular Constitution, the majority party in the Assembly and the majority party in the Senate is who the decision makers are with the governor on the budget. That's just the way it is.
Jeannie, what do you make of the greater confrontation, or at least the reported greater confrontation between the governor and members of the Assembly, members of the Senate this go round?
You know, it is confrontational, but I have to go back to the issue of the three men in a room, because I do think that that's absolutely a case, as Scott mentioned, where you can't separate process from the policy, because we know for a fact that women will consider different issues than men. I mean, that's been well established in the research. They were pushed for different issues than men will. So if you have a state, as we have, in which there's never been a woman in that powerful position or in that room where those decisions are made, the outcome is going to be be policies that don't reflect necessarily the needs of women. So I think that that's a very important thing to talk about, and I'm glad Eric Adams, whether he did it for theater or what, I'm glad he brought it up, and I think he's done a magnificent job pushing this issue, which is so important to so many of us.
A lot of this stems from the women's equality agenda and the abortion protections that Governor Cuomo had been pushing for that he's not been able to get through so far. If that gets through, does it matter if Andrea Stewart-Cousins was in the room for the negotiations? Or, again, I guess to my original question, does the end result matter? If the platform plank gets pushed through and becomes law, does it matter who's involved?
Well, I mean, if it gets through, that would be great. But the point is, it's less likely to get through unless you have a strong voice in there pushing for it. And I'm not saying the 3 men in a room won't push for it, although we know at least one has it.
She's raising another important point here, which is to the Eric Adams initiative to add people to the room. The theater does matter. You know, in a state that is so driven by what we talk about here and so driven by what's reported the night before, the fact that you're giving voice to some of these issues affects the outcome, just maybe not just as much as where the real power is, but affects the outcome. It's part of the mix.
Okay, as for the specifics of what's in the budget, there's a lot more policy issue in play than you might think when you just think budget. It's not just numbers. Team Cuomo is admitting that the administration actually saved all the Moreland-related emails despite that 90-day purge policy. What leads you to wonder if purge reform, as I'm calling it, will be in the final budget deal. Also, there's new pressure on Cuomo for statewide paid family leave to be in the budget. Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie says his chamber will pass that bill this week. On schools, Assembly leaders are willing to negotiate on the education tax credit. That would give people a tax break who donate to schools, and also on tuition that parents pay for their kids to go to religious schools. Critics call that a voucher program. Finally, the DREAM Act, allowing kids of undocumented immigrants to attend public colleges and qualify for scholarships. Senate Republicans are opposed. So my question, and I'm going to start with you, Dom, any or all of that make it into the final budget deal, do you think? Or is everybody just posturing at this point and trying to get what they can?
My experience in covering state budgets, you have a lot of posturing that goes on. You have a very strong-willed governor here. So I think that whatever his initiatives that he's very interested in, that's what you'll see in the budget. So for one, and it's not necessarily a policy issue, but to this governor, considering that his father had to deal with late budgets year after year after year, Mario Cuomo, having an on-time budget is very important for Andrew Cuomo. So I think that he's going to twist arms. I don't know the details of what's going to be in the budget. The professor, maybe Scott or a counselor could answer that question. But I can say that with knowing this governor's personality, I guess any governor, whatever their priorities are, somehow that ends up making it in the budget.
Scott?
And what's interesting about the list is there's something in there for everybody. And so there is the makings of a dynamic where you could get a lot of those things on that list because there's something for the Senate, something for the Assembly, something that's important to the governor. But it's New York, and you could end up with none of it.
A fair point. We certainly lived through that many times. Anybody got a problem with the education tax credit that would enable somebody to take a tax break for sending their kids to a private school, a religious school potentially?
I think I do, because what happens is people who don't have the means to send their child to that school are still stuck in the public schools. And all of the things that charter schools are able to accomplish should be able to be accomplished in public schools.
This isn't just about charter schools, and that's not actually
Well,
what the
I'm not
bill's
saying
about.
that it is, but what I am saying
What
is
it
this:
really
at the
is,
end of the
all it
day,
is-
if you invest in the public schools, and we take the same models that you have in charter schools, you can see a tremendous benefit in the public schools.
All this legislation does is allow for folks who donate to private schools to want to invest in education to get a tax deduction for that. I actually think we should broaden the opportunity for people to get tax deductions in rich schools throughout all parts of New York City. Certainly, parents have been supplementing children's educations on top of the public school budget for years.
But it also gives a tax break for tuition for schools. So you're almost incentivizing sending kids to private or to religious schools, and since you're using tax dollars, you're using public money to basically facilitate kids going to private schools.
Imagine if you did the same thing and you had a child who goes to one public school and they live next to another public school, and one is one of the lower rated and the other is one of the top rated. Do you give a tax credit to that person if they tuition into the net school district, even though it's not a private school?
All right, I got to go to a break. When we come back, we're going to focus on national issues, and we'll focus on Iran, where the nuclear talks are still on the table. Republicans are still steaming, though. Senator Tom Cotton has defended his decision to send a letter to Iranian officials asking them to block a deal with the White House. Has the party division grown deeper? That's next.